Thank you so much. I'd like to start with a short poem, so I'd like us to be quiet. I walk through this journey alone. I tiptoe through the darkness, through the dark, I steppity step. I sway, I bounce, I walk as they lurk. They linger, they stare, they plot, I match the footsteps of my ancestors, those that came before me, those that they cleared the path for my foremothers, whom they never speak of, the torch bearers, those who fought the battle so I can be here today, so I can walk, I can march, journey on. These are beautiful words by Nafula Wafula, who's also a Pan-African feminist like myself. My name is Mutheu Mutuku. I am a decolonizing, recovering Pan-African feminist lawyer. I'm an anarchist. I'm an alchemist. I'm an abolitionist, all those Easts. And also I'm a founder and creative director of a wonderful organization called Equality Vanguard, which is a Pan-African feminist collective working around digital rights and now land rights. We have a network of 40 lawyers under the Legal Vanguard. And these are 40 wonderful people who are committed to the liberation work that I'm going to be sharing with you tonight. Okay, so the lecture structure will be the legal framework for equality, both international and the local one. And then we'll get into what colonization means, what coloniality means, and the remnants of colonization in Africa. And then we'll get into intersectionality and the critical legal theory. I know a lot of us here are lawyers, so we know that. But if you don't know, no worries, I will get into it. And then we'll get into whose knowledge counts and getting into knowledge justice and who gets to decide who is quoted and why are women lawyers and women in general underquoted. Then we'll get into the leaky pipeline phenomenon. If you're not aware, please stay tuned. And then I'll get into possible solutions because this isn't about critique only, but also solutions that we can employ. Okay, the international framework and regional framework for equality. We have the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR. How many of you are aware of that? Seeing quite a number. Then we have the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Anyone know what that is? Okay, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is CEDAW, very popular. Then we have the African Charter on Humans and People's Rights. I really love this charter. How many are aware of that? The protocol to the Charter on the Rights of Women in Africa, the Maputo Protocol. How many are aware of that? Great. Then the Arab Charter on Human Rights. Then the national framework. I don't think I need to get into that. We are all aware of the Constitution and the equality clauses, all of that. So now, the main reason why we're here, it's about colonization, dummy. And the very reason why I had to base my arguments on the framework is so that it can give me some sort of legitimacy and you can believe that I'm an actual lawyer. Because if I didn't quote them, you'd be like, who's this girl and why does she think she can tell us all of these things? So yes, we have a colonization background, obviously. And for those who are unaware and for those who keep saying that Africans shouldn't dwell on colonization because we should move on. It's been a long time. We should think about the future. And some of those people are actually like President Barack Obama and Kofi Annan, disappointingly so. But then if you want to understand something, you have to get to its roots. And every scientist knows that for you to understand something in its entirety, you need to probe it, you need to understand its history. And very much so, I agree with the Tanzanian professor, Issa Shivji, who points out that historical context is very important for us to understand the problems that Africa grapples with. We need to probe its history. Also, Dr. Sylvia Tamale emphasizes that Africa's unique relationship with transatlantic trade and colonialism and imperialism puts us at a different level than other nations who are not colonized. So that's just to give you a context of the lecture. Before we go there, could someone tell me the difference between colonization and coloniality? Colonization and coloniality, are they different? Are they the same? Colonization is the act. Coloniality is the remnants. So colonization is the historical act of one country taking over another, establishing a political and economic kind of control. But then coloniality is the mind part. It's the remnants, it's the knowledge, it's the ways of living that the white man left. Hope you've learned something. So the colonial architecture of the legal system. We can all agree that our current legal system is not our own for most parts. It's something that was copy-pasted from somewhere else, right? And even after 6 decades of independence for most of us, for most African nations, we still heavily rely on jurisprudence that is not of our own. And someone here asked a really good question. If my grandma goes to the court, will she understand what is going on? Will she understand what procedures courts follow and what she's meant to do without being briefed and told all of these things? The answer is no, because this is not something that we came up with ourselves. Okay, I'm going to base most of my talking points on Dr. Sylvia Tamale. How many of you know Dr. Sylvia Tamale? That is amazing. Dr. Sylvia Tamale is a decolonial academic. She's a lawyer. She does really good work in decolonizing the law. So it's only right if I quote her. So everyone in the world is affected by colonialism. And it wouldn't be fair to say that certain people are colonized and they're therefore evil and we should see them in a certain light because they have these certain mindsets and the remnants of colonization. We are all victims of colonization. Even the people you hate the most because of their colonial ideologies, they are victims of internalized colonization. That is just one point to note. Also the wigs, somebody talked about it here. I already talked about this. The fundamental basis of the legal system in Kenya is the common law system, right? And we know where the common law system came from the British. And the characteristics of this common law system is repressive statutory laws. For example, why is homosexuality criminalized? Why exactly do we still need to talk about homosexuality as a crime? Because we're still in binary thinking, which is a characteristic of colonization. Men, women, good, bad. We have very little leg room for other identities that don't fall outside of those binary classifications that I talked about. There's also the issue of customary law being tamed to the confines of what can be termed as moral. How many of you are aware of the repugnancy tests? Yes. So the repugnancy test was set up by the British, obviously. And if you look at it, why is a white man telling us what is moral and what is not? Considering they came and colonized us, took our land, took our resources, and yet they can dictate what is moral and what is not. I think we need to rethink that. We need to rethink the repugnancy test, which also, it's alien, and it also it brings problem to customary law, because some things are very sound and very good to certain communities, but then when subjected to the repugnancy test, it is immoral because the white man said so. Doesn't make sense. But then this does not mean that there are customary practices that continue to perpetuate inequality. There are, but this session is not meant for us to get into that. this is meant to make you dream of something better, dream of practices that include all. Yeah. How many of you know this guy? Okay, unfortunately, you can't hear it, but then it's the guy that says, "You think I'm an everyday person? I'm a lawyer, my friend. Recipsa loquita." That's the guy. So in our legal career, obviously we are trained to feel different, to want to be different from the common man. And that explains why there's laymen and why there's lawyers, yeah? So for most lawyers, before they interact with you, they already think, layman. And it's the main mission to make you feel different from them. And this is one of the ways that inequality is created, even in the legal field. Lawyers are meant to think, to look, to speak in a different way, creating sects. This is a lawyer and this is a normal person. So as a lawyer, you're meant to do this, this, and this. You're not meant to be broke. The distinction is caused by us, I'm a lawyer, us being very close to systems of power and thinking by that virtue we're better than everyone else. And I think that's a problem in itself. If we're meant to advocate for people who encounter all these inequalities, injustices, why do we think that we're better than everyone else? That's just a question for us. Okay, I'll get into intersectionality and the critical legal theory. Intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a Pan-African feminist also, an academic, a lawyer in the United States. Critical legal theory critiques how the law interacts with all these other social issues. Intersectionality is a theory that shows how different social groups interact to create either oppression or some sort of privilege. So for example, your experience as a white feminist is very different from a Black feminist, right? An African feminist. Why? Because there's a difference there in race, you know? A disabled lawyer, for example, has a very different experience from an abled person, you know? So intersectionality just creates a theory to navigate all of this and to show that race, class, gender, family, all those things interact to create some sort of oppression or privilege for different persons. And that goes without saying that colonization in itself was very different in different parts of Africa. Colonization in Namibia, for example, led to the Herero and Name being killed in large numbers, the genocide, for example. In Kenya, the British killed us, yes, but not in such large numbers. So obviously the effects of colonization by the British in Kenya and the effects of colonization in Namibia by the Germans, very different. So the inequality in itself is also clearly different. Okay, critical legal theory asks you to understand that the law is not objective. You know, a lot of misogynists and the naysayers of equality like to say that, oh, but the law is very clear and the law is neutral and it's objective. That is not the case, because if the law is objective, the effects would be equal for all people, right? But that's not the case. So critical legal theory argues that the law is not objective. Instead, it's intermediate political and reflects power structures that are already in existence. Again, intersectionality, showing how disability and being a woman And all of those things interact to reflect your lived reality as a woman. Okay, this is a very interesting case, prosecutor versus Jean-Paul Akayesu. This was a case that was held at the ICTR in Rwanda after the genocide. And a lot of things arose from it, but tonight we're going to talk about, critique it a little, because it established rape as one of the ways that sexual violence can interact with genocide, right? But then Leslie Green highlights that there was no intersectional approach in this case. But then just to cut them some slack, intersectionality was coined in 1998, and this was also happening in 1998. Maybe they didn't have time to look at those nuances. But then Leslie Green says that as a disabled person, as a woman, in genocide, your experience definitely has to be different from the experience of a man, you know? I'm assuming that disability was also a really bad thing because you're immobile. There's someone who wants to rape you, someone has killed your family, and all of those things. There's also Jessica Horn, who critiques separation of psychosocial support from socioeconomic political justice. And a lot of us as lawyers like to get into the theory of things, but then we rarely get into the psychosocial bits of it. So this was also lacking in the judgment. I'll get into epistemic hierarchy. So I don't know, a lot of us who've been to law schools, you know that we quote a lot of jurisprudence from the West. From the moment you step foot into a law class, you're told who Lord Denning is, Lord Atkin. You quote all of these things and they remain in your mind. Years later, you remember what Lord Denning said in something, but then you can rarely quote an African judge, you know? So there's obviously a epistemic hierarchy in law schools. We're taught Latin phrases. Why the heck do we need to learn Latin in law school? And the main reason for this is obviously to make the knowledge inaccessible so that the common mwananchi doesn't know what pacta sunt servanda means and volenti non fit injuria and audial terram patem. If you know the words, you'll tell some of our laymen. And colonial intellectualism is very deliberate, like I said. All these things are not meant to make us smarter per se. They're meant to make the knowledge accessible to certain classes and make it inaccessible to certain classes. Okay, epistemic violence and whose knowledge counts. Like I said, we rarely quote African judges, African women judges. And why is that the case? Because we feel that men who are white are obviously smarter, you know, they have better words, they have ways of saying it that are better than African lawyers and judges. So that is a very deliberate erasure of African women in the legal field. And that's why everywhere I go, I like to quote Dr. Sylvia Tamale as a sign of resistance. And also, if I say something really cool, please make sure you quote me somewhere else. If you hear a lawyer say something really nice and they're a woman and they're African, write it down, post it, document it, share it with everyone so that we can end this erasure. Thank you. There's also documentation bias, where researchers like to document things when they're said a certain way, when they're said by certain people. That's why you'll not go to grassroots and get a lot of knowledge that has been documented, because we feel, they're not so learned, they won't fit the box that we want them to fit. And that's also one of the reasons why there's inequality. And that's a definition for epistemic violence. Yeah, the leaky pipeline phenomenon. I don't know if anyone knows what this means, but then I know there's people in this room who want to argue that there's a lot of women lawyers in the field. There's a lot of women in law graduating, getting into KSL, getting admitted to the bar. But why is there persisting inequality still? And this is the theory that explains that. The leaky pipeline phenomenon, it shows that there's a huge number of enrollments of women lawyers and women practitioners in the law field. But then when it comes to the senior roles, hate the hierarchy, but then when it comes to the senior roles and the decision-making positions, they are left for a certain select few. And if there are women in those leadership positions, you'll find that they're being controlled and there's a lot of pressure from different, for example, in the judiciary, from different arms of the government, so that they act a certain way and they're not persons for themselves. Yeah. So I have been here talking about the problem, probably bored you to death with the problem, but now I'm getting into the possible solutions. Radicality. A lot of us, when we hear the word radical, we have a negative connotation to the word. And I don't blame you, because we're in a world that rewards evil, that rewards inequality, that rewards all these things. But I'm just here to remind you that radical means grasping things at the root. And for us to move away from this inequality and this problem, we need radicality. And one of the radical ways I feel will help the legal profession is moving away from legality, because colonization was legal, apartheid was legal, all these bad things were legal at the same point. So if you keep quoting the law, what does that mean? There's no progress that is being made, because something can be legal, but is it moral? Is it what is right, you know? So yeah, the intersections of law and personal experience reveal how legal systems can, at times, perpetuate violence. It is crucial to move beyond conventional legality. And I'm sure a lot of lawyers don't agree, but you agree? So, okay. Another model that we could borrow from is Justiça Popular from Mozambique. This is decolonized customary law. What did it look like? So after Portugal left Mozambique, there was still a gap in the legal system that was there, meaning that the context that was there was not, and the law that was there, there was a conflict, you know? So these people in Mozambique decided, wait, how about we create a legal system with lay judges? Key point is lay judges, not learned friends, not lawyers. Lay judges come together to develop what is called popular justice. So Justiça Popular used to rule on cases without any legal background, you know, just your ordinary layman, but of very sound mind. And people who are very morally correct, obviously, they came together and they came up with a legal system that worked. Decolonized customary law again, but in the context of Rwanda, there were justice courts that were called gashasha. Anybody know of gashasha? Love to know that. So gashasha was also like an informal type of court system with lay people, meant to address the injustices that happened during the genocide in Rwanda. And this actually, another example is Mato Oput of the Acholi in Uganda. Another example of a justice system that didn't require all these colonial ideologies for it to work. I know there's criticism for all these two court systems, but like I said, we're here to dream of something better, but this is just to give you something to base something on, you know? Yes, another solution could be decolonizing research. Lawyers have this thing where they want a paper trail of everything, you know? If it's not written, it didn't happen. So don't clock it yet. The significance, I want us to think about the significance of oral histories, you know. There's knowledge that was not documented and not written that was really good, you know. But then we lost it because we have this hierarchy of what knowledge matters. And if it falls outside of all those hierarchies, we think, oh, it's not important. If it's not written, it's not important. What if we go back to valuing oral histories and advocating for anti-extractive research practices? Let stories be done, stories about women to be written by women, done by women. Let the women speak their stories and write their stories and talk about their stories. Thank you. Another possible solution is archiving women's lives. So a lot of us women lawyers, we move around life without documenting what we're doing. I know I talked about oral histories, but then make sure as a woman, as a lawyer, you're documenting everything that is happening, because there's a systemic erasure of our lives, of our accomplishments, of what we've done. Document it so that it can serve as an archive for future generations. Yeah, pretty much. So it's an act of preserving feminist memory. Okay, so this lecture is actually brought to you by The Difference She Makes. And one of the major ways we can contribute to the solution is embracing feminist leadership and accountability and collective care. So there's organizations like that that are already doing the work. It's up to you to support, to give back, to volunteer your skills into such organizations. Okay, my final solution has to be reparations. I don't know if you guys are aware that the African Union's theme for 2025 is justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations. And reparations is simply getting back what was stolen from us. And I feel this is a very key and central solution to us as an African people. First of all, the return of our artifacts, return of everything that is still in the Western world, and also rebuilding money that will be given as reparations will be used in rebuilding a justice system that actually works for us. So yeah, so reparations is just focusing on justice, historical injustices from slavery, colonialism, and aiming to produce a more equitable society. I know there are a lot of critics to reparations because you can't quantify the harm that these people did to us. And it's actually a bit insane and crazy that a lot of them don't even acknowledge it. For example, in Namibia, for example, there's a reparation framework that was suggested for the Germans, but then it hasn't worked still, because how do you quantify the number of deaths, the land that was stolen, the people that were taken from their country and to the Western world and alienated from their cultures? How do you explain that? And how do you quantify that, you know? But then I feel it's more of a solution because the harm has already been done. We need to move forward, and moving forward is by them accepting that they did all these things and having a reparatory framework where they say we are sorry, although it doesn't mean we accept it. It's just the least they can do. Okay, thank you for